So, welcome everyone to this webinar about LCA, which is hosted by HSbooster.eu. We will start with a presentation by our guest, Mirko. So Mirko, the word is yours.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. Let me wait a moment. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So, as I was saying before, I wanted to give a brief introduction without taking too much space to the next presentation, which is going to present standards. So I'm guessing it's going to detail way more on the different phases of life cycle assessment. But of course, if you have to talk about life cycle assessment without, let's say, setting the stage on the let's say the basic knowledge around that, is quite complicated. So I'm going to do that very, very fast. So, first slide is a definition of life cycle assessment, a systematic method for evaluating the environmental impacts associated with the stages of a product life from raw material extraction through materials processing, manufacture, distribution, use, repair, maintenance and disposal or recycling. Here you can see there are different kind of impact categories that are usually utilized to record the results of a life cycle assessment that can regard to ozone depletion, ecotoxicity, water depletion, and mostly what is most common climate change.
I think maybe we
Mirko, I think you muted yourself.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I was trying to change the slide. Probably I pressed the wrong button. So why life cycle assessment is important? It is important for many things. I try to concentrate on, let's say, the context of European projects. So we want to have an informed decision-making process because Europe pushes towards more sustainable and environmental friendly technologies. And we, as life cycle assessment practitioners, can provide some insights to guide project decision and in general towards sustainability from the early stages. Then we can have a risk reduction by identifying potential environmental challenges at low TRL. The project can mitigate risk of early on, avoiding costly changes later on. Or the project can easily align with European goals using LCA to follow, for example, recommendations or guidelines, or even greenhouse gas reduction goals. And what's more important is having a holistic view. So having a comprehensive perspective, we can consider all the different stages from raw material extraction to the end of life. And this can ensure that innovations don't inadvertently shift environmental impacts from one phase to another. Burden shifting, this is normally called. So the fact that we are not solving problems, but we are just moving them along the value chain. And then also we can increase project reputation. Okay, so I don't have to press the bar to change the slide, otherwise I mute myself. Let me see. Okay, like this. Very, very brief history and standards. So I wanted to collect here some of the standards and some very, very quick history of life cycle assessment. Born in the 70s, formalized with ISO for 4040 and 4044 in 90s, and then in 2000s. And I wanted to concentrate on the kind of development that went on at the European level, especially with the research performed at the JRC, the European Life Cycle Database, the initiative on the EU Product Environmental Footprint in 2011, and then all the succeeding reports that have been produced to try and better detail the ISO standards and make it more practical, a practical guide to perform life cycle assessment. Quite recently, and I wanted to mention this, in December 2022, they started working on the Safe and Sustainability by Design framework, which is very recent and still being developed, and very interesting effort trying to put together this sustainability assessment and safety assessment, toxicological assessment. And very, very quickly on the phases of life cycle assessment. So we have 4 main phases: goal and scope definition to establish the purpose, the functional unit, the system boundaries, data, and quality requirements. So I think you are going to detail all of these, say, concept later, but just wanted to describe briefly the functional unit, which is a quantified description of a function of a product that serves as a reference for the calculation of impact. So that's the reference point that we need to establish before any kind of evaluation. Then the inventory analysis, when we collect data on inputs, materials, energy, and outputs, emissions, waste, and we build the actual life cycle inventory model, the model that is going later to be fed to the impact assessment, where potential environmental impacts are being evaluated through impact groups, through particular methodology that calculates impacts on the different categories that we've seen briefly earlier. And then we interpret the results, synthesizing them, identifying significant issues, and provide insight for decision making. This effort looks quite linear. I mean, there are 4 phases, but normally this is not performed in a linear fashion. What does this mean? Life cycle assessment is an iterative procedure. This means that if you see here in the X-axis, we have time effort; on the Y-axis, we have data quality. We do a number of iterations of the 4 different phases that I described: goal and scope, life cycle inventory, life cycle impact assessment, and interpretation. So we start normally in a project or in an assessment with low quality data. For example, assumption, proxy, cutoff, simulation data, or some other kind of low quality data. We build the first model with all the 4 phases, so goal and scope, life cycle inventory, life cycle impact assessment, interpretation, and we provide the first assessment and can help us to start identifying the hotspot. So what are the environmental hotspots? So the phases of the process that are mostly impacting the overall the overall results of the environmental indicator. And then when we can start, we can keep on with the model when more data are available coming, for example, from the different work package of some specific project. So we can go on with another iteration and build a more, let's say, a model that is based on a higher data quality and that can give more, let's say, more objective, more credible, let's say, results. And this goes on up to the end of the project when the data quality that's been set in the goal and scope has been reached. So this is very important to understand that normally life cycle assessment is not some kind of a methodology that is put at the end, at the tailpipe of some project to measure something, but is something that can be integrated in the innovation cycle, a low TRL, to provide some answer here from early at the beginning of some project, in order to also drive the sustainability of the overall sustainability of the project towards higher degrees. So that's another slide that I wanted to put together that is about terminology in a sense. We have different ways of doing life cycle assessment. If we put ourselves into the present here, so we want to look in the future or to look in the past. if you look in the past, we have what is normally called a retrospective life cycle assessment, so a backward-looking analysis based on historical data. Normally, this is used when we are looking at eco-labels, environmental product declarations, so kind of studies that are just analyzing historical data, because the project, the product that or the service that we are assessing is already out there, it's in the market. The TRL is normally higher, is industrial scale, so we are looking at historical data, something that can be easily measured. But also in this case, we can have two different flavors, let's say, of a retrospective life cycle assessment. It can be attributional or it can be consequential. So if it is attributional, we are taking a snapshot of environmental impacts under static conditions. Let's say that we isolate the project, the product or process that we are, service that we are analyzing, isolate from the overall system, and we are just assessing its environmental impacts without considering broader system effect. And that's the attributional. The consequential paradigm or methodology or flavor of life cycle assessment is an analysis of environmental consequences due to system changes. So we are trying to understand what's happening in the surrounding system around what we are analyzing. This is not that common, a retrospective life cycle assessment. And most life cycle assessment, especially in the commercial ones that are dealing with industry, are related to an attributional, let's say, flavor. Let's say, if we look in the future, if you look in the future, we see what is called a prospective life cycle assessment. So a forward-looking analysis on potential future environmental impacts, also called an ex-ante analysis. Also here we can have two different flavors. We can talk about an attributional prospective LCA that is not considering broader system interaction. It is easier but less informative for decision-making at low TRL, and a consequential one, so that explore the potential environmental consequences of emerging technologies, considering broader system effect and market dynamics. This is very, very useful, especially in the kind of project that we are dealing with, so low TRL, and they are related to decision-making, so related to some policy-making decision. So they are made for some reason that relates to that. In these two differences, normally, what happens is that when you work in a prospective life cycle assessment, you start in an attributional one because it's easier, and you build sort of a reference, and then you can proceed with a consequential one. So next slide. I wanted to focus, as I told you earlier, on what is a prospective life cycle assessment. So prospective life cycle assessment has a very different, several definitions. So I've collected some of them, and I'm going to read a couple of them. So a life cycle assessment is prospective when the emerging technology is studied in an early phase of development, but the technology is modeled at a future, more developed phase. So the first difference here is that we are studying something that is a low TRL, so it's at lab scale, for example, but we want to model it at a more developed phase, large scale production. Why is it so? Because if we are doing some kind of a comparison, we are comparing something that is not developed yet with something that is already in the market. That would be an unfair comparison, because as you know, normally the economy of scale, the efficiency that is reached during the development of innovation lowers emission, lowers environmental impacts, and then it's normally not fair to compare them at different TRL levels. So one definition of prospective is the modeling at a different level than the actual status of the innovation. And another definition, studies of emerging technology in early development phase, when there are still opportunities to use environmental guidance for major alteration. This is another very interesting concept. So the fact that when the technology is early, is in its development phase, we have the maximum possibility to guide its development towards a lower environmental impact. So that's the best moment to start assessing its environmental emissions, its environmental burdens. So that's the concept that we are going to see in the next slide as well. Another definition by Toneman is prospective LCA is employed to ascertain the environmental impacts of emerging technology at an early stage of development. It is particularly aimed at assessing technologies that are not yet fully mature but have the potential to be environmentally impactful in the future. That's sort of a repetition of what was said early. Also, the third one by Kukurachi offered the same kind of insight, so I won't read this. Why it is important? This is sort of an explanation of what I was saying in the first definition. So when this is the so-called Collingridge dilemma that states that when change is easy, the need for it cannot be foreseen. When the need for change is apparent, changes become expensive, difficult, and time-consuming. So what can we see here? You see a very, very simple graph that put in a product development process in the X and the in high-low scale that can be different things. So the first thing that we see here is the prediction quality of an environmental impact. So we see that when we are at low TRL, low product development process or low TRL, we have low prediction quality. So normally the system awareness, so the knowledge of the system under analysis is quite low. And so the prediction quality is low. But we have the higher possible potential to influence the environmental impacts. When we proceed into development cycle at higher TRL, we see that we know the system way better. We have an increased prediction quality, so we better define the environmental impact of our innovation, but we have very little potential. So it's what I've been saying for the whole presentation. So life cycle assessment, it's useful, and especially in this prospective flavor, especially because it can drive the sustainability of our innovations towards higher degrees, lower impacts, since the early development, the low TRL choices are going to be made. So it is really important to start as early as possible, even if we know that the prediction quality and the system awareness is low. So the kind of prediction are going to have quite a high uncertainty, but this is it is important anyway, because we can deal with uncertainty with scenario building and other strategies, Monte Carlo simulations, and other sensitivity analysis tools. So very, very briefly, what are the challenges of prospective LCA? So here there are the 4 stages, and I've summed up some of the challenges here. For example, when you're building the inventory here, let's start from the goal and scope. So in the goal and scope, we have to establish a functional unit. So as we said, the quantified description of the function of a product that serves as a reference. So we know that we have an innovation. We know, we imagine that this innovation could perform one specific service. So we compare to some other established product that serves the same product, the same service. So, but we don't know exactly what is going to happen in the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So there might be that in the future, the kind of service that our product or the reference product is going to give us is going to change. So that's the first difficulty, assessing the functional unit of our technology and the reference technology, the incumbent technology. So also, we don't know how the new and the incumbent technological system will develop. This is related to the building the inventory. So what is going to happen in these years are going to be important changes in the process, production process of, for example, our reference product that brings down the environmental impacts, for example, or radically changes their production process. We don't know yet, so we have to model it with scenarios or different assumptions. We don't know how the background system develops. So we rely mostly in life cycle assessment on databases to build the model of what is called background processes. For example, electricity provision, or raw material provision. There are a set of processes that are not under the control of our innovation, of the production process of our innovation. And so we are going to use reference background literature values or database values for those. But we don't know what is going to happen in the future with those. I mean, will the electricity production becomes way greener, for example? This is the easiest one because we have already scenarios for that. Or, for example, materials that are used now are going to become more scarce, are going to become more rare. Conflicts are going to make them rarer and rarer. So we have to model this as well, and this is complicated. Oh, yeah, there are quite a lot of challenges on this kind of studies allowed here. I wanted to give such very quick flavor just to share a bit of information on also the difficulties on this kind of assessment. So let me go for the next slide. And we are modeling some new emerging process, and we have a very limited amount of data. We can have different amount of data. So we can have in different situations. This is a slide coming from Barkavatker. So we have different scenarios on how to deal with different data availability to model an innovation. So it could be that we have data coming from some plant data or some database. That's normally not the case in low TRL projects. So we can build a model on that. But if we have enough data on the specific process, we can use process simulation tools to build a process model and extract the mass energy balance from that, electricity production, energy consumption from these kind of tools. Or if we have even lower data, we can use advanced or basic process calculation models. We can use stoichiometry. We can have models like QASR models or molecular structure models that can, let's say, guess, in a sense, assume by statistic method the kind of impacts related to a particular molecule, comparing it to others. Or we can proxy, or we can even omit the process. So as you can see here, the accuracy becomes from high to low in the different possible choices, and just a flavor of what can be done to model something that is not yet in the market, that cannot easily be measured. You have to do quite a set of different utilize a set of potential tools.
Mirko, we have a question or a comment from Barbara.
Yeah, okay, it's just slide. If you like, I can complete, and maybe we can go back to question later, or if you want, I can stop as you wish. Because I cannot see you.
I can wait, thanks.
Okay, yeah, I cannot see you because wait a moment. Okay, can you see my screen?
Now it's gone.
Okay. Sorry,
and I can wait. Sorry.
Yeah, no, 1 second. It's just because it's last slide, so it will be quick. So how to model background data, background processes. As I told you earlier, we have many processes that are not under the direct control of our innovation cycle or innovation, and we have to assume how this will develop in the future. So we have one potential solution is using learning curves that normally correlation between the production, let's say, experience and efficiency, and normally they're related to cost, but it can be also related to environmental impacts. This can be used to assume what is going to happen when efficiencies in the production are going to increase, and then environmental impacts are going to go down. So this was the last slide. I perfectly acknowledge that, I mean, it's impossible to give a 30 minutes introduction on life cycle assessment and then also concentrate on what's more complicated and more, let's say, related to research-based, let's say, this prospective life cycle assessment is still on development. It's a part, let's say, of the overall framework of life cycle assessment. But I wanted to concentrate anyhow on this and give some insight on that, because I think that this kind of assessment is the one that is more relates to our specific project that are low TRL, so they really require to have a very dedicated approach, not the general, let's say, standard life cycle assessment. So thank you, and I'm open to question. Let me stop sharing if I can.
Barbara, would you like to give your comment or question now?
Yeah, I was waiting for the others, but yeah, there are no questions. Just to understand, especially your slide 11, I was trying to figure out how a project that is still in the laboratory proof of concept development can utilize data from the databases that I gather are actually taken at the scale-up phase of a product. Is that correct? And how do you take into account that the environmental impact at lab scale might not be as efficient as positively, hopefully, as a scale-up at the scale-up level?
Yeah, that's the precise effort of my presentation. The idea that we cannot utilize databases out there, because normally we are dealing with processes that are far from TRL 9, so yeah, they're far from the industrial scale. So we are going to utilize other tools. So what can we do? We have to build specific models using different strategies. For example, we can use process models. We can use Aspen or, for example, SuperPro Designer to model the process and extract all the information that we require, to build the life cycle assessment model. For example, we would require other potential materials, regions, or whatever that are utilized into the process. So we require electricity, we will require heat, we will require. We can rebuild the model utilizing the data extracted from these tools. But this is not often the case, because normally, and that's also my experience, you don't have even enough information to build a chemical processing model. So you have to use, let's say, lower quality assumptions. For example, as you've seen, there are equations coming from, let's say, chemical modeling manuals that can be helpful to build a more generic, let's say, model of the process. Or sometimes you can even end up using stoichiometry in order to build what you require. Or also proxies, and that's recently I've been going through these QASR models that are used in toxicology, and there are some efforts also to assess the environmental impacts. So basing on similarities on molecular structure, you can sort of rebuild the production process and make some assumption on its environmental impacts. So there are several potential tools that you can utilize, but of course, giving more details on that is out of the scope of this seminar, but I just wanted to mention, because I know that many of you will enter in some different way in contact with people doing life cycle assessment. So I wanted you to be aware of the kind of requirements that you are going to have, the kind of requests, because in my experience, I always feel sort of, let's say, I mean, I see that people that are partners feel puzzled by my request, because they don't really understand what the kind of depth of the information that we require to model their processes. It's life cycle assessment is a quantitative assessment tool, so it really it's built on data. So we need data, and yes, as you said, there's low data availability, a low TRL, and most models are based, database models are based on ITRL processes, ITRL processes there, so that you cannot just compare pear with apple. So you have to build some. There's another answer to this that goes in the direction of upscaling. That's another thing that I didn't mention in my presentation. That's a thing that you normally do with chemical process models. So you build a model at a low TRL and then establish some upscale scheme in order to transform these as it was at an industrial scale to make it comparable. But that's a thing, yeah, it will take quite a long to discuss. Any other question? You see, Marie-Yves?
Yes, if there's time for another question. I was wondering from your experience, is there a minimum? So what is the minimum TRL level needed to go into the prospective LCA?
I would say 3, 4. Yeah, but yeah, it's really the minimum, because normally you start having some data from that level. So you
So as soon as you have a little bit of data, that's enough.
Yeah, I think the earliest the better. So you can start providing some. Also, what I think that's probably going to be mentioned later in the next presentation, we life cycle assessment can provide answer on the sustainability of the overall say innovation, but can also provide relative answers, like such as where are the phases most impacting. So maybe we are just concentrating on electricity consumption of some specific process, and we are totally not considering a very, very tiny regions that has a very small mass amount, and that is not even noticeable there. But then you end up discovering that this is going to create a lot of trouble. And maybe that's the interesting part of the consequential life cycle assessment, is going to create more trouble in the future. And this kind of assessment need to be established as early as possible, because we can still take different direction, avoiding this specific region, for example, finding an alternative by taking into consideration all of these things.
Thank you.
So so that's why you mentioned strict chemical analysis in terms of what chemicals are used in the process, and look at their potential effect.
I didn't understand.
So if you have, like, I'm thinking about some of the materials that are proposing our project, if you can go through a different chemical or biochemical route in the building of the material, those are one of the key early checkpoints that you might want to do with the LCA, right?
Yeah, you can establish different scenarios, for example, and within the different scenarios, different pathway, you could establish different sub-scenarios to take into consideration what could happen in the present and in the future. So you can already, I mean, there's a lot of effort in that, but I think that would be really helpful in establish the best, let's say, potential sustainability route for sustainability, let's say, to.
Thanks.
All right. If there are no further questions now, of course, you may continue to ask questions. Jesper, do you have a question or?
No, it was just that I think there was a hand, but it was taken down.
Okay. Anyway, thank you very much, Mirko. I think it was very interesting. I think it's a really good point that it's a very good idea to start early on with these LCAs, even though you are at a lower TRL. And with that in mind, I'm going to give the word over to my colleague, Jesper.
Yes.
Thank you.
So before I show my presentation, I just want to set the floor, because I'm not an LCA practitioner. I work in Danish Standards, and I work in the environmental field all over. And Mirko has done a presentation for what the LCA can. But I still think it's important for us in standardization to come in and tell you a little bit, because a lot of different things is happening, especially right now, because the European Commission is looking at standardization to solve many of the sustainability issues that we are facing in the future. So with these words, I will show you my presentation. Okay. Can you see it now?
Yes, that's perfect.
Perfect. So I've already said that I've been in Danish Standards for 11 years, and previously I worked in the Danish EPA, working with chemical legislation, REACH legislation. So in order to setting a landscape for what we're talking about when we are talking about the standardization and LCA and the environmental field, it's important for you all to understand that there are two levels of standardization. We have the ISO level, which is the global scale, where we have IEC and ISO. IEC is the electrotechnical sector, everything you can set electricity to all products. And ISO is its test methods and different calculations. And we have the same at EU level. We have the CEN, which is similar to the ISO technical committees, and we have the CENELEC, which is more or less the same as the IEC. And it's important for you to understand that it's not that we are doing different things at the European level. The technical committees we have at European level looks very much similar to the ones we have at ISO level. It's just that ISO and IEC, you have to think that we are on a WTO scale. So we have Asia, we have Africa, we have United States and South America and Australia. All countries and continents is involved in this. And when we are talking about CEN and CENELEC, it's about the single internal market in Europe. And it's also important for you to understand that the reason why we use standards is that it's because that so we can agree, and a lot especially at ISO and IEC level, it's about when we have to send products one way or the other in the value chain. It's really, really important that we can measure things with standards when we make contracts. At the European level, we have more a tendency to look at also at regulation. For example, we want to regulate and create sustainability issues, prolonging our different regulations. And if I go to the next slide, you can see here, this is a tendency line that more or less shows historically. If you look at the place where it says new method from 1985, that's where the European Commission, they wanted to start the European single market. And that was the time where they were starting to think about doing regulation instead of directives. When you have a directive, each countries have to implement that direction into their own laws. But by then, they started to think we need to have regulation at European level directly to each country. And that, in order to do that and keep the single market working, they said, well, we can't write legislation for everything. So we're going to send a lot of projects to European standardization, and that was what happened in 1985. And then as we came to 92, 93, we had the Amsterdam and Maastricht treaties that were setting the scenes for what we know today. So, and this concept is important because if you look at today, from 95 and so on, you know, we have the tiger economics from Asia going forward, and today we have a lot of standardization from China and Australia and other countries, because many of these, especially third countries, they have seen the light that if they want to be the one dominating a certain markets, they need to be in standardization. As an example, I can tell you that at some point, China, they gave free hotels, and you could come and have meetings and meals, free meals for a week in China if you wanted to standardize and have the meeting in their countries. Right now, in the European Green Deal, we have you see that the blue figure is turning vertical, but right now we have a boost in European standardization, especially when we're talking environmental standards. So that was me setting the scene for what we're doing in standardization. So what happened in the 80s in standardization was that the Japanese, they started producing really good cars, and in Britain they could see that the cars coming from Japan was much better, and the products coming from Japan were cheaper yet better. So Margaret Thatcher, she said, we need to do something here in Europe. And then they started doing what we know today as the quality management system, which is in some ways similar to the way we look at the lean structures and all these principles that come out of Japan. So they started doing quality management systems. And after that, they said, well, maybe we can do something also in the environmental sector. And they started doing, instead of quality management, they did a standard also for environmental management. And that standard was put in the what we call ISO TC 207 Subcommittee 1 Environmental Management Systems. At the same time as they did this, they also started in the 90s, as Mirko showed in his presentation, they started working on life cycle assessment standards, which is in Subcommittee 5. And that is the quantification of the environmental performance. So also important for what I'm going to say later is that at the same time, they also started working with the environmental labeling standard. And these standards, which is in Subcommittee 3, they are very much looked at today in the way when we do green claims and stuff like that. And that is important. But for now, I'm going to focus on Subcommittee 5 first. So in Subcommittee 5, we have a lot of different standards for under the life cycle assessment subcommittee, but I took this with me not so that you should read it, but just to show you a lot of standards exist. There are two main standards which is important, and that is the 14,040 and the 14,044. So they are the two that we will mainly focus on. So these two standards, the 14,040 is focusing on the principles and the framework, so that it gives the overall broad principles of how to do an life cycle assessment. And actually, Mirko has already shown some of the slides that I'm going to show, so my life is going to be a little bit easier. But in the 14,044, we have the requirements and guidelines. So the 40 standard, it shows a broad principles and framework of what's going on. But when you get to 14,044, you get the requirements that are more specific and what you have to live up to when you're doing an LCA according to these standards. So I think Mirko presented much better than I can present what is the difference between attributional and consequential LCA. So I'll not go into that. I'll just jump over that. And because then I think it's better that my presentation focuses on the landscape of standardization and what is going on in regarding legislation. But in the standards, if we look at 14,040, we can see that it has a scope that says what is in this standard. And actually, this is also very much the same as was described in Mirko's presentation. Some of the first thing you look at is that when you do an LCA, you're doing a scope of what it is that you want to be specific of when you look at an LCA. So, for example, if you know that 90% of the environmental impact is in a certain area of a product or a system, you shouldn't make too much focus collecting data in all the other areas. Mirko, you are very welcome because you are much better at doing LCA. As I said, I'm not a practitioner, so feel free to come in and make some points here. Then we have the life cycle inventory assessment. That is the data collection, and then we have to do an assessment of the data, and then we have an interpretation phase. And I think I'll skip this because Mirko already showed this. So what is more in the standards? We have in the standards there are also terms and definitions that describe. So, for example, if they're doing an LCA in South America, they have the same definition of what is a life cycle inventory analysis. It is written down in the standard, so we all of us point to the same place. And as we said, and as what Mirko was saying, is that it's not very easy to do a life cycle analysis. And there are a lot of data you have to collect, but at least we are pointing at the same standards. So this helps us when we are doing these life cycle analysis. And I think one of the experts in my mirror committee said something like, "Well, we are measuring equally." Wrong because we have the standards. So we are calculating a bit off, but at least we are doing it in a correct manner and have the same ways. And that is also something that I'm going to show you a little bit about. So this slide was also shown by Mirko. So maybe I can say on the right side, it says that its application is for product development and improvement and strategic planning and public policy making and marketing. So, but yeah, as Mirko has already shown this, I will not go into details with this. So if we look at the 14,044, which was the requirements it provides, it actually has the same scope as you saw in the scope of the 14,040, but it also has requirements, and it says the goals and scope of an LCA shall be clearly defined. And when we have shall in standards, it means it's something, if you want to write this product or this thing is living up to the 14,044 standards, you have to live up to these. We have other criteria where we write should or may. When we write this, it's more vague than when we use shall criteria. So in this requirement standard, you see it's more or less the same as the 14,040, but now we are getting more into details. We have a goal and scope definition, and we're preparing for data collection. We do our data collection, validation of data, relating data to unit process, relating data to functional unit, and doing data aggregation and refining system boundaries. And I could turn it around and say the reason why Mirko presented the things he presented in the way is also maybe because it's in a standard, so that there is a clear process for how, when he does an LCA, how he should do it. So now I'm going to show a little bit about because there's something in the standard about allocation, which shows some of the problems with uncertainties when you have an LCA. So, but instead of me, I'm trying to be. I will just give me 1 second. I will make. So thank you, but was it Emma? So what I want to show with this is that there is some implication when we're doing LCA, and where the standard can help is, for example, when you're doing allocation, it says that wherever possible, allocation should be avoided. So that is first step in the standard. And if you have to do allocation, if it cannot be avoided, the inputs and output of the system should be partitioned between its different products or function in a way that reflect the underlying physical relationship between them. And if that's not possible either, then you have to look at the physical relationships and try to look at the subsystems and reflect on the relationship between them. So So that is another way to show that the standard goes in and helps with these different problems, because we have to calculate in the same way. So you can say that the working with the LCA standard is a methodology where you are always interpretation data, and it gives a good basis for how you should work with your methodology in an iterative process, like Mirko also showed, collecting more and more data and evaluating your data as you go. So, and then when you're finished, you should describe what were implication in my LCA and what gave some problems, and where is my LCA weakest. So another thing that the LCA standard also does is that, let's say that you want to use your LCA to make a comparative study used in the public. We had in Denmark some years ago where they took the plastic bags you carry from the supermarket and the paper bags, and they made an LCA of those, and it shows that plastic bags is actually equally sustainable as a paper bag. And it gave huge discussions in between the NGOs and the different parties. So when you're doing an LCA that is meant for public discussions, the standard also describes that there needs to be a panel of interested parties that shall conduct this critical review on an LCA study in order to support the comparative assertion. So that is also one of the things that is important in the standard. So Mirko also...
Sorry, I don't know if we're supposed to see slides right now.
Oh, sorry, you can't see the slides?
No.
Man.
Yeah, now we see it.
Okay, sorry. Okay.
It was just after the video.
Yeah. So it's from here. Okay, so I show you can read the yellow line. So it has this thing on a critical review, and it describes that there needs to be a panel of interested parties. Actually, I got a question from the ombudsman in Denmark, asking because one of the LCA experts said that the PEF method has a very much more clear description of what an LCA expert practitioner doing a critical review on an LCA, how many years of experience he needs to have. So that's one of the areas where the Commission in their PEF project has been very much more in details with how they want the LCA to work. However, it is also important for me to say that all these different ways of working with the LCA goes back to the 14,040 and 14,044 as a basis. But now I'll just go to the next slide. As you also see here, the ILCD, as Mirko showed, that has the European Life Cycle Handbook. If you go to the homepage of that on their webpage, it says on the first page that it's based on the 14,040 and 14,044. And I saw a LinkedIn post a couple of weeks ago where a person from the European Commission had described something in the environmental field, and one of the experts from Bo Weidemar said, why don't you use the LCA standards? And the Commission said back, well, the LCA standards is very, very generic, and we can't really use them when we have to deep dive. But I actually agree with this, but at the same time, I think that one of the things I want to show here is that they may be broad, but you have to think we have to have all the 160 countries or 180 countries that is part of the ISO. They have to be in line with what we are writing in these standards. And if we wrote a standard and were more specific, we will very quickly end up with well, we have to have an LCA standard describing for these types of products, and then we have to have it for these type of products also. So the way you should look at these standards is this is the generic methodology of how to do an LCA, and not a standard for how you are going to exactly conduct your LCA in your company. So me and Charlotte, we are also in something called SABE, with the long word Strategic Advisory Board on Environment, where we help the Commission in European standardization taking decision in the environmental field. And this is taken from the European Commission's presentation 1 month back. And it's about the proposal for a new green claim directive. And you can see that in their working with the Green Deal claims, a new directive for claims, they are still focusing on the scientific evidence and international standards. And I'll come back to the 14,020, the subcommittee 3 series in just a while. So the reason why they're doing this is to protect consumers and enable consumers making informed purchasing decision based on critical environmental claims and labels. And yeah, and the bottom one, improve legal certainty and level of the playing field. So that is what the Commission, they want to do in this area. So one of the things I also want to show is that the Commission is in this area, when you are doing your product category rule for a PEF, they want to make a database. Right now, when Mirko does an LCA, maybe he uses software from Gabi or Simapro, but in the future, they can still use that, but that is private software schemes. And it's difficult for the European Commission to set requirements and saying to companies that they have to buy very expensive software to do to live up to regulation. Therefore, they are working on this database. But that is also one of the weakness and the challenging things about when we are talking about LCA. It is we are always ending talking a lot about we need more data. And then when we talk a lot about that we need more data, somebody wakes up and says, well, we also need to make it more clear what we're doing, and it needs to be more focused. So it's always this playing field we are playing in when we are talking LCA. So now I'm showing you if you remember the earlier slide for the Technical Committee 207, I showed you that there was a subcommittee 5 for the LCA, but there's also a subcommittee 3 working with the labeling standards. And these labeling standards is the ones that are used, for, as you see here, when you have the 14,044. That is the one that is used for the swan that we have in the Nordic countries, and also the flower that is used at EU level, or what is the German, the blaue Engel in Germany. So they had these national schemes. But the 14,024, it links back to the 14,044. So in that way, we're still, when we are looking at these standards and we want to do a green claim, which in itself is really difficult, you have to show that your product has a significant environmental better impact than the product you're comparing yourself to if you want to make a green claim. And that is one of the things that that is one of the things that the ombudsman in Denmark he uses when he's working with the claims, because we have many companies that come to us in Danish Standards right now, and they say, well, we can see that we are losing markets because other companies, they're saying that they're green, but they have no evidence in showing that they're green. So it has been a really, really strong parameters, and a lot of these companies, they're just saying it, and the companies that want to do it in a proper manner, they're losing markets right now. So that is really, really a big problem. So the thing that the Commission, they work on in the PEF methods is connected to that you have to do the 14,024 product category rule, and then they have to do an EPD according to 14,025. Then we also have a footprint communication, 14,026, and then there's a self-declared LCA, the 2021. So these are the standards, and the reason I put this in is to start showing you in this long, boring presentation on life cycle assessment that there is actually a reason why we use the 14,040 and 44. We use them because a lot of the other standards, and as I'm going to show you, and legislation also point back to these standards. So, yeah. So,
sorry.
Yeah.
It's the self-declaration in 21. What is it? It means that they do their own LCA following the 40 and the 44, or they can declare whatever they want?
They can.
In the previous slides you had.
Yeah. I'll just go back in there so that we have it on when we talk about it. So, for example, when we are talking 14,024,
I was more talking about the 21 that you mentioned.
Yeah, I know. It's just
sorry.
describe it the other way around. Sorry. When we had the 14,024, which is used by Blaue Engel and the Swan in the northern countries, we have a national scheme. So that means that in Denmark, the Danish EPA has appointed the secretariat, which is actually in Danish Standards, to do this eco-label, and they make the criteria for the eco-label, and they do them according to this, but they are the verification procedures. That is a national scheme in Danish Standards that has this secretariat. When you're doing a self-declared 14,021, it is only yourself that is saying, I have done my own declaration. I show that I live up to 14,044, but it's only me that is doing it by myself. But I don't think that, at least in Denmark, there's not many companies doing this because it's still a fairly difficult process for doing so. But that just means that, for example, in the EPD, you can live up to it by having an external verification procedure. So in 24, we have a national setup. Also in Germany with the Blaue Engel, with the EPD, you have to, if you want to live up to the standard, you have to have an external verification procedure. That means a third party that comes in. But the 21 is a self-declared system where you can do it yourself. And then if, let's say, the Commission, they want to say, well, we want more people to do self-declaration in the future, then you can say, it is good enough if the companies live up to the 14,021, because we don't want to make the companies doing an external verification procedure. Does that make sense, Barbara, a little bit?
Yes, it does, but it sounds to me that there is no European standard on how to do the eco-labeling. Maybe
No.
there's one needed.
No. Yeah, but you can say, maybe that needs one to do the eco-label. Right now, there is a lot of discussion in the European Commission because the Commission at some point, or the politician, they said in their proposal that where there are European future legislation, let's say eco-design or other stuff, you cannot have national schemes in the future. And now the national schemes are starting to say, well, we think it's really a bad idea that you start only looking at PEF and the eco-design and not keep building on the national schemes that are already existing. So that is just a political discussion that's going on right now. So you could make a standard describing more thoroughly at European level what the 24 should do, but it's actually also maybe a little bit what the Commission is trying to do in their new claims proposal directive, as I showed you earlier. So that is where they're trying to get closer to. Well, it's because the Commission. I have to speak in the right. It's because I have two screens. Sorry. Now I look. It's because the Commission right now, of course, they want to have more green claims that is part of the single market in Europe, so that we don't have a Blaue Engel in Germany and we have the Swan in the Nordic countries, because that is not complementing the single market in the EU. And that is clear. But on the other hand, you also have the problem that in Denmark, we trust the Swan, and in Germany, they trust Blaue Engel. So that is the contradictory between these two things.
If I can just supplement, Jesper, because the Commission actually said that they will not, with the new directive, will not accept more national schemes or regional schemes, but they will keep those that is in place for several years. We don't know how long. So that's how they look into it, because we know that these national schemes has been very upset and afraid that it would be shut down due to this new legislation in EU. But I think it's looking back at the ISO standards, it's quite strong that we have this framework of making eco-labeling. So I think it's good that we have the ISO standards, again, like the LCAs covering the framework, and then we can have these labeling schemes.
I was just thinking for our project, because what you're saying, it really seems to imply that really early on the projects will need also to start to make a marketing decision.
Yeah.
And that looks well for the EU flower. They make it's normally it's the JIC who makes the studies before they make the rules. So it's very close to the regulation.
Because, like, for your information, our projects have partners from different European countries. They might decide to shift the ownership of some of the innovation that eventually might lead to the product. But I might think that decision might not be needed to be taken now, but it really sounds like everything is interconnected. And
yeah. It is. You could also say that it is a bit difficult right now making a lot of decision, also because the Commission is at the forefront in so many areas, and all these areas is developed at the same time, like the eco design and the PEF methods and everything. And of
talking
course,
about the eco design, Jesper, we haven't got that much time left, and I know you're going to talk about the standards under the eco design. Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So, yeah, I just wanted to show that that the PEF method used by the European Commission is also looking into the 14,040 and 44 standards. So I know that many of you or some of you in the project is also working in the area with the bio-based materials. So I just wanted to highlight that there is a standard called 16575. It's in the right corner, up in the right corner. There's a vocabulary standard for how to do LCA in that area, and then there is the actual standard, the 16760 on bio-based products. It is more or less the same as the 14,040 and 14,044. The difference is that as I highlighted with yellow, is that you can do studies that do not cover the whole life cycle, but rather in a business-to-business relationship, cradle-to-cradle or gate-to-gate studies. So it has a different scope than the LCA standards. Then also there is a standard that we use in the construction sector that focuses on the PEF methods, and it is actually a standard that is very much used for doing EPDs, as I showed you in the previous slide for doing the claims or labeling. This standard is also an LCA standard, very much focused, and this work is more or less also what is looked into when you look at how the development of PEF has to be in the future. So I really want to make it also talk a little bit about the eco design regulation, because that's also one of the new things that is coming from the European Commission. And 6 years ago, the Commission, they came to us in standardization and asked us to help them build a foundation for how they could work with the circular economy in standards. And they made a mandate 543. And the idea was that the eco-design legislation, it set minimum requirements for products, like if you have a vacuum cleaner and if you put your foot down on the hose and it goes in, it has to come out again so that you can use the vacuum cleaner. So they had these minimum requirements for the vacuum cleaners. But now they want also to have focus on the materials and this in a circular economy manner. And if you have the energy in the use phase, the energy is measured by the, when you go buy your refrigerator and you can buy a refrigerator that is A+++, that is the way that it is pulled out on the market. I'll show that in the next slide. So if you have the energy and the materials, you have more or less a basis for the resource energy of the product. So you can see here the minimum requirements at the left side is eco design, rules and REACH, and different standards that says what the product has to live up to. And then you use the market to pull the best products out on the market, for example, via the labeling of the refrigerators with the energy label. And it is now supposed to be in the future that we are trying to get new labels, for example, on durability and stuff like that. And then in the top area, we have the eco-label standards. But there can also be very voluntary initiatives and going on in the middle. So what have we done? We did a lot of standards. We did a standard for durability, and this standard goes into describing how to assess if your product can live longer than other products. And we have an NGO called ECOS that are in standardization, working close together with us and the European Commission. So imagine in the future that your printer may have a claim on it that says that it is actually durability to live longer than other printers. That would be very nice. Then we also have standards for the ability to repair and reuse and upgrade, and it is different standards that scores. For example, we have the Apple phone that is really you can't take the battery out and stuff like this. So this is trying to make a different criteria for scoring how good a product is to be repaired or upgraded in the future. It also includes software, for example. And then we have the working group 4 that works with the ability to remanufacture. These standards are not that good right now. They're starting to amend them, so they will have more focus on refurbishment. Refurbishment is more correct in the manner that when you take a computer back and you clean it and sell it again, it's difficult to give full warranty as a new product. These standards that exist right now, remanufacture is like selling a new product, so they are difficult to use, but there are new ones coming. We have in working group 5, its recyclability, and for example, the 45557 is how you measure the proportion of recycled material content. So imagine in the future that you want to measure the plastic, the virgin material of plastic in a product together with recycled plastic. You can use this standard, and it's actually a joint research center who also work together with us in standardization, developing these criteria. It has a measurement for post-consumer and pre-consumer plastic, pre-consumer content, material content. But that is not actually the difficulties. The difficulties is how are you really going to measure this? Because are you going to measure on one batch, 2 batch, 1 week, 1 month? Do you have to measure on one location or the whole company? So that's where it gets complicated. Then we have working group 6 that are working with critical raw materials. It's different like rare earth metals and the metals that are not available for us in the long run. And then we have an information standard. And more interesting in working group 8, we are doing a standard right now on circular design of products. How can we in the future design products to be more circular in the development process? And it's Philips and Schneider Electric and companies like that are working. So let's just get some questions in here, if there are any.
We can stay a bit longer. Now, I think that it was set till 11:30. So if anyone has to go, you just log off. But if there's any questions, we can stay. No.
Was also a lot of talking.
Yeah, but we will also be available if you have questions during the project or to any of these many standards that you've just been introduced to. It could be, I know it's emerging areas, so we probably don't have anything on the shelves that just fit in to your project, but the LCA standards will be a great help, I think. And maybe this new standard on circular design is also very helpful standard, but it's not finished yet. It's supposed to be published in September next year, but it's just been for a review.
Okay. I don't know, Marie, if you want to take the lead or I take the lead.
I can thank you. You can finish, but I want to thank you for the series of 3 webinar. Also, thanks for allowing that we can record. So I think this will be very useful for us.
Yeah.
Also for those who were not able to attend, that we can go back and and look at this information. And Barbara, I don't know if you want to add something.
Yeah, no, I think that this gives a lot of food for thought. It's a type of food that probably most of us are not very used to it, so it might take a while to digest it. What I wanted to say here, having all the projects, there is a booster grant that you can't apply to because it's not based on application. It's based on invitation from the EIC, from my agency to you. And so it's very key that when you present your results in the review meeting to the monitors and to myself and to the program managers, if he is there, that you also maybe reflect the learning that you've done through these webinars and identify any needs and think about, potential need for those of you that did not have an LCA or even collaboration to set up a new standard in ELMs, think about showing those needs to the technical monitors and the program managers and to the agency. And this is something also for the Horizon Standardization Booster is good to know because you have the service also that I want to remind you that they offer. We talk about it several times, but this then can be complemented further on as the project matures to a very more specialized professional look at your project product. So, and on my behalf, I thank you very much to the Danish Standard Institute for all that you've done for the projects in ELMs. Thanks a lot.
And thank you, Mirko, for your presentation. It was really, really good. It was not because I'm not a practitioner, as we also talked about, but I think it's still relevant because the Commission at the moment is looking very much into standards and because the Commission, they don't want to do regulation in all areas. They are also in the future looking at that if we want to deliver on the green transition, that the companies, they have to do it themselves also. And that is why they are really focusing on that standards has to help in this area. So I think in that way, it's really important to know what's going on. But there are a lot of things going on. We have 49 standards that the Commission, they want to do alone in the plastic area, where they want to do recycling standards in that area. So a lot of work.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah. Okay,
so then for those of you who are having a small holiday break this week, have a nice holiday break. For those of you working